You're listening to the People Agenda podcast, brought to you by leading HR, workforce and payroll transformation specialist, Lace Partners. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Welcome to the People Agenda podcast. It's me, Chris Howard from Lace Partners. Thank you, as always, for joining us on this, a spin-off series. Now, myself and Debbie Mitchell have interviewed a couple of fabulous CPOs already on this spin-off series, which we're calling What is a CPO? That feels very like meta. Maybe we'll change the name of it. I don't know. But for now, we're going to keep it as What is a CPO? And what I've wanted to do for a while on this, but I only reached out to her, to be fair, only a couple of weeks ago at the time of recording, and she said she'd come straight on. It's Danny Harmer, who is a CPO from Aviva. How are you doing, Danny? All right?
I am very good, Chris. Thank you. Of course, I came straight on. And happy birthday.
Oh, thank you very much. I will be celebrating it, as we were just saying, in the virtual green room by drinking copious amounts of wine and getting told off by my wife at some stage. And of course, with this podcast series, this spin-off series, I need a partner in crime. That partner in crime today hasn't been on for a while. I thought you were losing the love for me, Aaron Albury, but you're here, aren't you?
Never losing a love, Chris. And thank you for having me back. Okay. I thought you had decided that I was persona non grata anymore.
No, of course not. Of course not. Aaron, you and I are going to quiz Danny on some of the questions that we've asked as part of this series. But just for those of you listening in, if this is the first time you're listening in, we recognise that the CPO, the Chief People Officer, the Chief Human Resources Officer role, is very different across every different type of industry, every different shape and size. No two roles are created alike. And so the reason why we're doing this series is really just to dig into some of the challenges that CPOs face at the moment, some of the exciting things that they think are in their role, but also the future function as well and the evolution of it too. So that's really what we want to dig into today. That's what we want to pick Danny's brains on. But before we get into that, if you are a regular listener to the podcast, you will be aware of our fundamentally different question. If you're not, then that is a completely random, totally not related to HR question that we like to ask. And Aaron, I'm going to go with you first so that we give our guest a little bit of thinking time to select today's answer. The question that I'm going to pose to you is that I just read an article on Sky, I think it was, talking about somebody off the Florida coast that has just found some long lost Spanish treasure in a big old-fashioned treasure box, and it had lots of Spanish gold and silver coins. I don't even know if they're doubloons, but I'm not going to be history shamed. Don't fact check that on that for me. What it did is it got me thinking about an advert in the 90s. I think it was the 90s. Frank Bruno gets washed up on a shore and a treasure box that arrives, and in it is some sandwiches, sausage sandwiches. He's quite sad about that, and you think, it's random. But of course, it's a advert for HP sauce. So the second treasure kit that arrives has got HP sauce in it, and he's delighted. So Aaron, some treasure gets washed up in a nice box for you. And what are you picking? What's in it?
Great question. I love it. And I've gone from a house with air conditioning and water supply, which apparently I can't fit into a chest, so that was taken out, through to Frank's option of bacon sandwiches and sausage sandwiches. But I think, maybe it's because it's Christmas, I'm going to go for chocolate-covered bourbons, which are my find of the year. I love a biscuit. Anyone who knows me knows I love a biscuit, and it's one of my failings in life. I can eat them like crazy. And our favourite high street store has brought out chocolate-covered bourbons, which I think is inspirational. And so, yes, just a box of those, and I'll just die happy on an island in a chocolate coma.
Nice. Do you know what? I'm an obsessive Arsenal fan, so my choice was going to be a flat screen TV and a Sky subscription so I can watch Arsenal. That's really lame. I'm sorry, but Danny, please salvage something. You've got something better than a TV and a Sky TV subscription, right?
I'm not sure I have. The first thing that I would have in my chest, I may have to have a couple of things in there, would be sun cream. Because let me tell you, I have the skin off fresh out the fridge chicken, honestly. Unless you're giving me the factor 50, this is not going to be fun on my desert island. And then I'm thinking an outdoor kitchen. Because if you're out, you want to be out and about in the sun and enjoying yourself and making yourself some nice food. And maybe if we could just squeeze like a couple of friends or someone I know in the box as well, so I'm not on my own, I'll be all right for a while. Not long, but a while.
You are a chief people officer, emphasis of people person and all that. So I can understand trying to put some threads, to shoehorn some friends in there. Let's kick off just a little bit. I'm sure lots of people listening in will have heard of you and will know you. But do you want to just, for those of you that don't, give them a little bit of a potted history?
Yes, I'm sure nobody's heard of me, but I'm the Chief People Officer at Aviva, have been here for 5.5 years, joined a month before lockdown. Anyone who was working in our job in lockdown, that was fun. Prior to that, I was at Metro Bank for around 7 years as their Chief People Officer. When I joined, we had 325 people. When I left, we had 4,500. So it was a very exciting growth story. And as an organisation, their sort of relentless customer focus, which is something that's still in their DNA, was great fun. And prior to that, I worked at a number of banks in both operational distribution type roles and HR roles. Halifax, Lloyds Banking Group, Barclays.
Okay, so let's kick this off then. Nice ethereal type of question from me, which is, what do you see is the role of a chief people officer? Let's just go helicopter view, because obviously there's tons of nuance to it. But in your world, what does that look like?
Yeah, I think the job of the Chief People Officer is to get all the people in the organisation aligned towards achieving what it is the organisation needs to deliver, achieve, purpose. And so that's having the right people to do it, giving them the right skills in the right places, all that sort of stuff. But ultimately, in Aviva, we've got post direct line acquisition, probably 35,000 people. How do we best make sure that on the basis the performance of an organisation is only made up of the performance of its people? How do we maximise that? How do we make it the best it can be?
Excellent, Danny. And I'm very struck by the fact that when we met in Metro Bank, and you've worked most of your career, as you said on your intro, in regulated environments. Do you think that focus shifts in a regulated environment at all? Does it hone it even more? What do you think?
No, I don't. The regulator is there to keep. The PRA is focusing on keeping the economy systemically safe, and the FCA is making sure that customer outcomes are fair. Arguably, if as an organisation you're focused on doing the right things, you're always going to be fine from a regulatory perspective, right? They're very important. They're not setting a bar that's unachievable for organisations. They're going, how do we keep customers, the economy safe and make sure that organisations operating fairly, prudently, sensibly? You can do all of that and have fantastic performance in an organisation that's great to work for and in, that does good things for customers and shareholders. I think all of those things can happen at the same time.
That's lovely. I want to ask you a question about how the roles have differed, because as I said right at the start of the pod, obviously no two roles are created the same. The remits that you'd have had in your previous roles would have been different. What's been the kind of big differences between the types of roles that you've had?
There is definitely something contextual about the job. But I think if you are in HR as a profession, one of the reasons that probably it's important if you want to be a CPO, CHRO, that you move around is that you understand how you do HR, how you do our profession. Because if you only ever do it in one place, there is a risk that you think HR looks like how the organisation does it. But in my earlier HR roles in Lloyds Banking Group and HBOS Halifax, largely I was looking after very big teams, and therefore you have large numbers of people, not necessarily the most senior people, lots of them doing similar roles. And actually your job is about performance, consistency, learning, talent management, succession. Is big scale operational HR. When I went to Barclays, I was looking after the corporate function. So I was looking after less people probably than I'd ever looked after, certainly for a long time, but much higher touch, because you've got small numbers of very senior people, all with very different technical jobs. Succession planning isn't just a sort of natural flow through from entry level, team leader, assistant manager, area manager. It's a much more complex landscape. People tend to be higher paid in that environment. So you need to understand remuneration, onboarding, exiting, all of those things. I think it's much more technical HR. So there's something about not just the organisation, but the type of population you're supporting. And then in terms of the sort of organisation, so Metro Bank, when I first started, was still a startup. And my job there was to support the culture, because ultimately how you treat your people is how they treat your customers. If you want to set something up with a really strong customer ethos, you've got to work out how to do that in the almost how to systematize, is there such a word, culture at an early stage, so that what was happening with 300 absolutely fanatical, focused on the mission people is still happening when you've got 4,000. And the other thing that we needed to do was put in place all the infrastructure and rigor that you're going to need in the organization without slowing it down, making it too bureaucratic. But I always talk to the team at Metro Bank about whatever we do now, we need to think of two things. Firstly, we need to leave space between the trees because this organisation is growing. And if we just plant all the trees really close together, someone's not going to thank us for that. And secondly, anything that we build, we need to build it remembering what has not worked about all the HR systems, approaches, policies, processes that we've seen in other organisations and try and take the best of it. When I came to Aviva, the challenge was a different one. I think customer is in our DNA in Aviva. The teams who look after customers in Aviva are absolutely fabulous. But organisationally, we'd lost our way a bit. We'd not really focused on performance in the way that we should. We had some strange approaches to remuneration. We weren't great on succession planning, talent, learning. We didn't have a corporate university. So over the 5.5 years I've been here, it's been a case of, for a very established organisation, weirdly put back in the sort of infrastructure, the basics of performance management, learning, linking reward to performance, making sure that everyone is relentlessly focused on delivering for the organisation, for our customers and shareholders. And in parallel, Amanda Blanc, who's our CEO, fabulous, has been making sure the organisation is the right shape and size so that when we all do that, the organisation performs really well. So there is something contextual, but I think having in your toolkit the ability to deal with big operational teams, small specialist teams, functions, senior people, junior people, boards, understand how all the wiring of HR works together, and then being able to apply that to the organisation you're in. Because the first thing we have to be is commercial. What is the point of what I'm doing in terms of the performance of the organisation?
And I think this point about the experience you gain over your profession and how you then reflect on that around how you hold the truth around the role, really important. And it's just fascinating listening to what I was going to ask you, the mantras that you now hold to. So if you look, as you go into sessions and you find yourself in a new environment, what do you hold to? What are the things that you've learned through that career as a CPO that now you go, they're the fundamentals of me as Danny as I do my role?
I think they're the things that I talk to my team about. If they were here, they'd say she bores us about them. So the first one is to be commercial. You have to understand what success looks like for the organisation and then work out how what you're doing contributes to that success. As a profession, sometimes we're so busy focused on wanting to demonstrate that we're adding value that we focus on activity instead of outcome. And that's when we fall into the whole new shiny things. This is the latest fad. This is the latest trend. What's relevant for Apple or Amazon or Lloyds Banking Group or Sainsbury's? Why is that relevant to me anyway? So the first thing is to be commercial, understand your organisation. The second is to be expert. I think you do need to know what's in your kit bag, what should be in your kit bag, what you can use, what the levers are of performance for the organisation through people. And then the third one, and I think this is a newer one for all of us, is this future focus thing, that the world is changing. The pace of change is accelerating. How do we make sure that we're equipping the organisation to perform brilliantly for today and tomorrow at the same time, and thinking about what are the skills we need? How is work changing? This is not a new thing, right? When I was first at work, we had secretaries, typists, people filling up photocopiers. There were jobs that just do not exist anymore. And those people are probably still in the world of work and they've learned to use technology in a different way or do different roles. It's still happening. It's just happening a lot quicker and over a lot more scale. So unless we are thinking future and today, we're definitely not doing what we need to.
Can I ask a question that kind of builds on that then? how much do you see it's you and your team's function, that's a responsibility, to be able to spot and recognize talent within your workforce and then redeploy it with that in mind? In my head, I'm instantly thinking about, and you and I were just talking just before in the virtual green room, before we actually went live, we were talking about how I was talking about how my team's role, even in the last year, has changed because they're learning to develop tactics and skills with AI in mind. But what I'm thinking about more, the question for you is more this idea of, because you just triggered that view with secretaries of 20 years ago that are still in the workforce and redeploying those sort of skills. How much is it HR's responsibility to be able to spot that and to be able to be the driver of that?
So I think our job here is facilitation of the conversation, because if you say to a leader, what's your business going to look like in 5 years? Most of them will say to you, firstly, I don't know. Secondly, do you know how busy I am? Wafty HR, off you go, please. Thank you very much. Don't come back. Don't let the door hit you on the way out. So we have to facilitate the thinking and the conversation in a sensible, approachable way. I think it can be contextual around change that's going on. That's often helpful as well, depending on what's going on in the organisation. And then we need to provide them with data and insight that helps them to understand what is likely to be true. None of us know what the future holds. Neither Aaron nor I put a crystal ball in our chest. Maybe we should have done. If we were sitting here and I go, so do you think jobs are going to use technology more or less? We'd all go more. And do we think simple tasks that can be done by technology will be automated? Yes. And do you think customers will become more happy to use self-serve? Yes, as long as it's frictionless. And so there's some stuff that we definitely know to be true. And I think we have to be the facilitators of the conversation. We have to be the providers of data and to help them with solutions. And largely people would talk about that in terms of strategic workforce planning. And there's a continuum, which is you need to know what your workforce needs to be in the next 6 to 12 months from a planning perspective. And then when you start to think about it over the next 3 to 5 years, because then we go, we need more digital data technology skills. How are we going to get them in? And that's when my team should be saying apprenticeships, T-levels. We could partner with somebody. We could offshore stuff. We could work with an outsourced provider. That you start to work out how to source it. I think there is another responsibility we have in this space, though, as well, which is, and we did something at Aviva, or we have something at Aviva called the Foundry, where we know that more people need to be more data, digital, AI, technology savvy. And we know we need more, for example, software engineers than we've got today. So we are just going to push that kind of training down into the organisation because it is a no-brainer, no regrets, sensible thing to do. And I remember when our first person who had been customer-facing, customer agent on the phones in Norwich changed from doing that job to being a software engineer. Now, someone in tech, we go, software engineering is going to be done by AI soon as well, Danny. All right, fine. Okay, steady. But how cool is that we can do that kind of thing with our people? And for me, having worked in so many customer-focused organizations, I know that somebody building technology for customers or colleagues who understands what it's like to be a colleague or to support those customers does a better job of it.
I love this point about the facilitation and conversation, data and insight. You're not there to replace the leaders of the business on this kind of stuff. As you say, we haven't got a crystal ball for it. One of the things we have heard a lot, though, in the last, I think, year of doing these podcasts, talking to CPOs, is a change in the narrative around the level of involvement of the CPO in that strategic kind of conversation. And I don't know if you've seen that reflected. I know you've talked to a lot of other CPOs in the roles that you have as well. But it does feel that as a profession, we're more valued in that conversation right now than we have been historically.
Yeah, 3 or 4 years ago, maybe a bit longer actually, probably pre-COVID, quite a lot of people in the sort of HR people function at a senior level, I still heard this, dare I say, bleating of, I haven't got a seat at the table. We have definitely moved on from that in most organizations. There are still some, and you see some bigger organizations starting to push HR back in through a governance role or a coup role, which is bizarre because the only thing you really have as a business is your people. Why would you not have it sitting around your leadership table? What is it that you don't believe to be true about the function. If you've had a bad experience, CEOs, if you've had a bad experience with a CPO, CHRO who wasn't necessarily right for your organization or at the top of their game, fine. But that's not, that the solution isn't sticking it under somebody else. It's about your people. So I do think that in most organizations, everybody understands the differentiator is people, whether you are talking about the sort of strategic workforce planning future of the organization or executing of what we need to do today. So I think it's in a better place. But you know what? We've got to be good at our jobs and earn that as well.
Yeah, I think a lot of that as well. So we did a podcast with Catherine Dolan, who was the CPO of Bureau Veritas at the time. I think she's at Mighty now. And Catherine was talking about talking the language of her fellow C-suite. And you talked about it earlier, like the commercial kind of mindset. So can we just explore that a little bit? And also, can I just get your perspectives on not just yourself, but when you go along to other events, you've got Gartner Evanta and things like that, where you get to meet other CPOs, the role that having the voice that you've got within that C-suite, how you've found it, where those relationships are most key would be interesting. And again, apologies for you listener listening into this, a little bit of a shameless plug. We had a research report, which we had of 450 CPOs, CEOs, COOs and CTOs, where we asked them about things like, what's that relationship like? How does it get better? So I really want to explore your view on how you've found those relationships. Are there any particular relationships across your fellow C-suite members that you found you've had a natural sort of closeness, affinity with? And maybe also then let's touch on that idea of speaking the language, if that's all right. I feel like I've asked you about 4 questions in one, so just pick the bones out of it.
We'll work through it and see if my aging brain can remember. In terms of relationships that naturally gravitate towards, there are some people on the leadership team that as a CPO, you're more likely to work a bit more with, but a bit of whoever's doing your sort of corporate affairs comms, because you spend quite a lot of time. Internal comms is sometimes it sits in the people function, but there's that overlap. You need to be aligned on that. And finance people. But actually, I think there's a more fundamental about your role as a CPO. And I think some of the mistakes that I've seen other CPOs make are, you have to remember that you hold information about the performance, succession planning, future careers of your peers, which is a slightly strange dynamic. Now, either you hold that with utmost respect and total confidentiality, and the people around you see that you do that, and you have positive intent about wanting every single one of your peers to win. And then I think you can have great relationships with the whole of the leadership team. If you hold it in some weird power crazed, not even power crazed necessarily, but slightly a sense of knowledge is power, Pandora's box thing, and overly leverage that with your relationship with the CEO or with the board in any way, I think that you'll get the relationships you deserve if you do that. It's an absolutely appalling thing to do. And I think anyone who does it, it goes to show that they don't understand the privilege of our profession.
It sparked another thought for me, Danny, because this dynamic that as a profession we have, that insight that we have, because you could be working with the chair to replace CEOs over time in this kind of role, is that happens frequently. So you have to have a level of distance. It makes it a bit like a CEO type role, quite a lonely type environment at times, because you have to think about who you're talking to about what and so on. We hear that a lot in the conversations we have. Where do you go for your advice, your mentoring, your sort of conversations? Where do you reach out to as a CPO to find that kind of connection?
Yeah, my boss, Amanda, is fabulous. The chair of our Remco is fabulous. I have regular one-to-ones with our chair, George, as well. So I'm very lucky that people around me are very supportive. And actually, my peers are incredibly supportive of me. So the rest of the leadership team at Aviva, we have one-to-ones and I go, how are you? And then they say, and how are you? You just have to be grown up and hold stuff confidentially and appropriately. And the thing is, if everybody sees that you do that, that then reinforces having great relationships. I do also have some fabulous people who, mentors, friends, former colleagues, that sort of stuff, people who I've worked with previously or I've been introduced to, and we have, I'd like to think, mutually supportive relationships where we check in every now and then. And if I had a problem and I was trying to work it through, there are people I could contact. And that's incredibly precious and valuable. But I think it always has to be two-way. It can't just be, who are you going to call? Ghostbusters. Hang on a sec. Who are they going to call? Right. There has to be some reciprocity in it, I think.
Yeah, I really love that. We are almost out of time. So I want to ask just a final overarching question. It's more around the profession as a whole. What do you want to see from HR? So if you're turning up to, as I said, we've been along to Gartner Avanta and you go along to stuff like the HR Guild as well. If you're all sitting down in a room and having a conversation in June, July next year, maybe even a year from now, what do you want to see that's changed from the profession?
I think I'm boringly consistent, right? I think it's still about outcomes rather than inputs and new initiatives. We've got to, evolution is much easier than revolution. The whole thing that we do as a profession where we swing from managed performance regularly and monthly one-to-ones to we swing absolutely the other way to this sort of, don't worry, don't do any of that. That sort of weird fad that there was 7-8 years ago to just get rid of performance management and then be surprised when performance dropped. We've got to start with the whole, what is it we're trying to achieve? And because we are dealing with people and people are hugely complex and we're dealing with people in systems of organizations and businesses which are hugely complex, small adjustments can make massive impact, but there are so many other changes going on at the same time that it's really hard to see how what you've done has had an impact. So I think we need to slow down, start with the business, look at the data, small adjustments focused on improving the outcomes rather than, dare I say, winning an award for some new initiative that's unproven. And I think we also need to think 3 to 5 year timescales.
Yeah. Absolutely love that. Listen, Danny, we're out of time, which is annoying because I had about 5 or 6 more questions. I wanted to dig into culture as well. I might do that on a separate podcast because
maybe I've been too verbose.
No,
maybe that's the problem.
No, of course not. Aaron, thank you very much for co-hosting with me today and firing the questions.
Thank you both.
Always a pleasure.
Thank you very much. Hopefully you've enjoyed listening to this podcast as much as we have enjoyed recording it. If you want to, Danny, if they want to connect with you on LinkedIn, just to say hello, how do they find you? Where do they find you?
I am on LinkedIn, Danielle Harmer, I think I'm down as. Yeah, Danielle Harmer.
Easy to find and easy to chat to as well, and not just buttering you up because you came on the pod for us for, I think, the 3rd or 4th time. So thank you very much, Danny.
Thanks very much.
If you like this podcast, please feel free to give us a like, a review on all of the places that you usually get your podcasts. But other than that, I just want to say on behalf of myself, Danny and Aaron, thank you very much for listening. And we will catch you next time on the People Agenda podcast. Bye-bye.